Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Hope you're doing all well and hope you've been enjoying your Pride Month. This recording may come out during Pride. This may come out just the month following. It just depends on where scheduling falls. But either way, I hope you've had a good Pride Month. And so continuing with the energy of that, we're going to be talking with a friend and fellow brother of mine. But before I go talking about that, I want to remind everyone that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not constitute working with a licensed mental professional. Please seek one out in your area. So as I said, we're going to be talking today with a friend and fellow brother of Northwest ONYX here that has done a project which I think some of you, well, I'm certain if you've been a long-time listener, you heard me have interviews with at least two of the editors on this, which was William Taylor and Victor Kerning. And this was the project We Belong. And so my brother here, who was sort of late to letting us all know about this.
Hey,
you were late to that. I had already scheduled the interviews with your editors and had recorded at least one of them before you.
That's true. That's true.
Before you mentioned it, so I was like, "That's on you."
That is no. You're right. Sorry. I'll let you finish the intro.
So as you've heard their illustrious voice, so who I'm talking about is Jordan Green. They, them is a designer and artist based out of Seattle, Washington, a West Coaster for life. They have lived in Portland, Oregon, and grew up in the San Francisco Bay. They have a deep love of comics and storytelling, and they were first published in the We Belong, the all-Black, all-LGBT sci-fi and fantasy comics anthology. They can be found at Jordan's Art, or you can find Jordan's Art at Instagram at JKGARTZ. Again, JKGARTZ. So, Jordan, welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. This is great.
Thank you for coming on. So, as I ask everybody, so how did you sort of get here?
Well, you yelled at me a lot. No, you had asked me to be on the pod a while ago, and I was like, before 2024, I was really bad at self-promotion. Being gun shy about stuff. And you, even before We Belong came out, you had asked me to be here. And so like be on your podcast. And so We Belong, you found out kind of like, you know, to all of the listeners, honestly, you found out that I was in the anthology kind of when everybody else found out, and that was like really, really last minute. Like it was basically they had asked us to do the Zoop, like the crowd fundraiser, and I had asked like maybe a couple of friends, and then they were like, "No, really, we need to do a big push," and so I put it out there, and you got on me. You were like, that because I follow Untangle and Grow on Instagram, and I follow it like multiple places, and so you were just like, to me, you were like, for a fact that I have Victor and William on my show, and you didn't say anything. Like, and I didn't know anything about it, and so you finally, and then after that, you were like, you need to come on the podcast, and I was like, okay, and it then took you another 2 or 3 months to get, like, I'm working on it. You know what I mean? Like, you were just like, so that's kind of like how I ended up on the podcast. And then, if you want to go metaphysical with it, like how I ended up here, there's a whole bunch of other stuff along there. But like, yeah, we'll get there.
Eventually. For that, honey.
Yeah. So, so
All
yeah,
right.
that's the short answer to that question.
All right. Uh, so then let's talk a bit more about this project. We Belong. So how did you get involved with it?
Again, Instagram. Instagram is kind of the place that I hang out on the most besides Twitter. Online. Actually, I'm on social media a lot.
Mm,
But Instagram is because it's such a good place for artists, or had been such a good place for artists. I went. I follow William on Instagram,
mm,
and he posted about We Belong, and for a long time I had done comics, and what I didn't publish anything. I was really gun shy. I was really scared.
mhm,
And so I applied. I wrote up two different two different pitches. I wrote those up. I sent them to William, and they accepted William. I'm sorry. Yeah, William accepted them along with Victor. And from there I worked on the comic for about 4 or 5 months. It was 10 pages, and it was an incredible experience. It was also the most exhausting thing I did in 2023, hands
mhm.
down. That and, my grandmother passing, but that had happened after the comic got submitted. So yeah, I would say the most labor intensive thing I did in 2023 was making that comic.
Understandable. And
Yeah.
to welcome you into this much broader, so I would say, field as a beginning and budding artist. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
So the We Belong comic, for those who, if you haven't gone back, have a chance to go back and check that podcast out. As I said, it is a all LGBT and Black sci-fi and fantasy comic anthology. So you've got a lot of stories of the various aspects of what it means to live as a Black LGBTQ variety in science fiction stories, which we don't usually see a lot of.
Yeah.
Your particular one, as I read it, has a very which is a lovely story about two individuals going out on a date, has a very, shall we say, Power Ranger feel to it.
Yeah, I mean, the short synopsis is, what if a magical girl, like, for listeners that may be familiar, what would it be like if Sailor Moon and the Red Ranger went on a first date, you
Mhm.
know? And but then you make them fat and black and queer. And it's a very I feel like it was a very simple premise, and I just kind of wanted to explore that and see what that was like. Um,
And for
sorry,
those
you're sick.
wondering, and for those wondering, I am dealing with allergies at the time,
Yes.
so that's why you're hearing my voice and coughing like that. Um, which is a very much an aspect of the what ifs we don't usually get to see, since everything stays within its own, shall we say, universe in those different
Yeah.
kingdoms between Magical Girl and, say, the Sentai Power Rangers.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for saying Sentai. It's funny because people don't when you love something and you're a geek and you're a nerd, you have all of these phrases and jargon and stuff. But really, I wanted to invite readers in and people in to the story. So I try to move away from jargon when I talk about it. But and it's not jargon; it's just very specific terms.
Hmm.
But I I really loved so growing up, I loved Sailor Moon. I loved the magical girl transformation. I also love Power Rangers.
Hmm.
And I love, the Japanese media that I consumed when I was a kid was really, really, really fantastic. And for me, and I really didn't see all of myself represented in it. And like for most people who know about Power Rangers, especially with all the documentaries coming out, we know that Power Rangers is just old Japanese superhero shows, Sentai shows,
Hmm.
cut with American recordings, cut with American stuff. So for me, they made the Black Ranger black in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, cool. He's a hip hop dancing person. Uh, and I actually got to meet Walter at WonderCon, which I know we're going to get to, but
Yeah.
I had a chance to. Yeah,
I met him when I went to San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah,
I was like, I had to get that signature.
Yeah, he's fantastic too. He's a great guy. And funny story, I just like wanted to take a selfie with him, and I forget that celebrities make their money off of like those sort of things. So you can't just like walk up and take a selfie with a celebrity. So yeah, but he was really gracious about it. He was super cool. But yeah, I think that I wanted to write a story about that. I just wanted something fun. I think one of my favorite science fiction writers, Octavia Butler, wrote Fledgling after writing The Parable of the Sower and the Talents.
Mm-hmm.
And wrote Fledgling. And for those of you who haven't read it, it's like Octavia Butler, it's doing a vampire story. So people are super familiar with Anne Rice. It's Octavia Butler's take on the vampires in New Orleans or things like that. And it was a great story. It's a great book, but it was something for her to have fun with. And I think that I wrote the first date comic right out of quarantine. We were just starting to get out of quarantine. I had just experienced a lot of personal loss.
Mm-hmm.
And excuse me, I had done a lot of escapist media. And the thing about escapist media, for me, cartoons, comics, stuff, is oftentimes you don't see yourself. I didn't see myself as a fat, queer, Black person who was assigned male at birth, represented. And if I did see myself represented, I wasn't the center of the story. And so writing that, and also you don't see romance between two. We've gone so far in queer representation in media compared to even the 90s or the 80s or the 70s that you just don't see a lot of queer Black relationships presented, especially in media that is light and fun. It's always, and they're not the center of it. It's always that they are, how do you say this? It's always that they're either the background character or there's struggle involved. And I didn't want that. I wanted there to be conflict, but not struggle.
Or they're the support system who nothing happens in their relationship. It's all about their third person who is usually the center of the story that they now have to turn all their attention towards, and you never really get to see them having their relationship unless it starts turning into them arguing about what's going on with the other character.
Yeah, like there's a cartoon out, I forget what it is, but they have they have a Black dwarf and a Black paladin, I guess. And they like have a budding romance in which they're like warriors that are fighting, but they're not the center of the story. Like the main protagonist of the story, they're very much like ensemble background characters. So what if we just took some time, all that energy, and focused on those two characters? Yeah, so that's where I came from with that.
Lovely. As well as I gotta say your image of hate and malice was also very pointed.
It was very pointed. You know how long it took me to develop that character? So in the pitch, because I want you guys to go see it. I want you guys to go.
We're not going to reveal what the protagonist looks like. You're going to have to read the comic for that, but still.
Right. But in the pitch, it's a floating eyeball. If you see the roughs, it's just a floating eyeball with flames coming out of it. And in the story, in the development of the story, one reason I will say that this was the most labor intensive, and sorry I keep cutting my sentences off because there's just so much coming out. But one reason I would say it was the most labor intensive is because I developed the characters while I was developing the story, while I was developing the script. So all of it happened at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm doing it by myself. So there's not people to bounce the idea off of. And I also this makes this comic kind of pushes me into the realm of professional instead of amateur. But before I went and did this, I thought of myself as just an amateur. And so I didn't have, there's a lot of artists that have a community of other artists to bounce ideas off of. And I didn't have that. I worked in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And so developing the antagonist was really difficult. It was really, I was like, how can I make a character that people would immediately read as evil and would immediately say, you know what, that actually, I don't stand for that at all. And I don't want this monster to win. There's no sympathy for these monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took some time to develop what that looked like. And good artists and great artists steal. So I combined a couple of different short stories
Mm-hmm.
to to their antagonists into one monster, and that's where it came from, pretty much.
Which, yeah, which if you had stuck with your eyeball, I'm sure there's more than enough people who would want to be having a phone call from Watsy and D&D about looking like a beholder.
Exactly. Yeah. I play a lot of D&D. And I know that you had Jack Thompson on here. I know that you've done a lot of.
I actually haven't been on here yet, which is an oversight on my part.
Oh, yeah. Oh, did y'all do a different recording?
We did a different recording. That was
Okay.
thing,
I was like, I feel like I heard you. Yeah. Yeah. You should have Jack on here.
again,
But
oversight on my part.
no, you're very busy, but Jack Thompson, for people who listen to this and don't see Perry in other media, Jack Thompson and Perry did a Dungeons and Dragons session together. And Jack Thompson has sort of parlayed that into doing more Dungeons and Dragons and kink stuff.
Leather.
Yeah, Adventures in Leather. And so that's really cool. But yeah, I play a lot of D&D. And so I think that's the other thing as an artist, like ideas can come from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be careful you don't end up ripping off someone's intellectual property in a way that gets you and that other person into trouble or hot water. So
which sort of is also how you sort of dance and screw that line with the magical girl and Sentai Ranger stuff.
Yeah, those are wide enough concepts now that other people have done them. Like one of my favorite comics that's an ongoing and the other one that just wrapped up are both takes on Magical Girl and Power Rangers in in a more of American context. So and Sentai Warriors themselves is just, Sentai means team, and really it's the Japanese take on superheroes. So Power Rangers is just the Japanese take on the Avengers, if you want to look at it that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's also showing that aspect of the idea of Sentai Rangers is very different than, say, something like Ultraman.
Yeah, exactly.
Looking at that collective power standpoint as being the responsibility of a very singular character, which is what you get from a very American audience too. But yeah, even though we talk about
and to that point, Americans are more familiar with Power Rangers, something like Ultraman or Astro Boy, like in general, right? Because I didn't know who We Belong was going to. I thought of when I wrote my comic, I was writing to nerds that would pick up comics but may not know every trope that I knew.
Hmm.
And so I just kind of drew characters that I wanted everything in the book or in my story to be accessible quickly. So, because my thought is this could be given to a longtime fan, but it could also be given to a new fan.
Hmm.
I grew up, I was very fortunate to grow up in San Francisco, and every Saturday from ages, God, probably 9 until about 14, I would go to the San Francisco Public Library and I would read. I would start off, I went into the main library downtown and I would start off in the children's section and eventually find myself up at that time on the third floor in the teen section. And they had a graphic novel section for teens.
Hmm.
And the teen center, it wasn't even a center, it was literally a corner in the library. I spent so much time in that on the third floor in that corner reading all sorts of comics. I read all of Rumiko Takahashi's work, so Ramna and Inuyasha and Lum. I read that. I read Guyver at the time. I read BB and the Diva, which is written by Rupert Kennard, and that is a black comic. It's a black slice of life comic with a black gay superhero, and the diva is like a worldly old black queen. And it was they were just great comics. I got exposed to a lot of dykes to watch out for there, like that. All of those comics exposed me to a world that was really, really awesome and really, really helpful. And it filled me up in a lot of ways. And it's in a lot of ways saved my life. And so I wanted to write something that could be put on a library shelf
Hmm.
and a kid one day could find it. Because libraries are incredibly powerful and they make a world accessible to people. And I was lucky to be in San Francisco and find all those things, but I've been in places that are not as liberal not as far left who have comics that I read growing up on the shelves. And so that's who I was aiming for, was folks who may not have access to the magical world I grew up in, but could have access to a magical world I created.
Which I think is a very key question to consider, and I'm going to float this towards you,
Mm.
especially as not just queer, but men of color who have grown up. What do you think about our culture's issue with the arts and work like this that seems to still be a matter that we're sort of, I hate to say, pulling out of the dark ages on?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think that I want to acknowledge that as queer Black people, we have always created,
Mm-hmm.
and that living in the concept of queer, living in the concept of Blackness, um, the Harlem Renaissance and the niggerati were creating stuff way, way back in the day. And throughout, if you look at the history of cinema and film and writing and arts, we have existed and we have created stuff for ourselves. I think that since the invention of Twitter, in the 2010s, that the national discourse, the discourse of people who have uh, been aware of the arts that we create for ourselves has exploded. And I think that the consciousness has been raised.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been done for a lot of really good work has been done by activists on the ground who in policy who have raised the consciousness and shifted conversations. Intersectional activists who are artists as well. And I think that has scared a lot of people who are used to only seeing their narrative be told. And I'm not just talking about white people. I think it scares a white straight people. I think it scares a lot of Black straight people. I think it scares a lot of Black queer people who are used to being in a certain category and being seen in a certain way and aren't used to them being the focus of attention. At the same time, I think it's given a lot of life and joy to people who have been hungry for this. Something like RuPaul's Drag Race is the tame thing that people watch. It's the thing that people are watching together, that they're like, their straight Midwestern grandfather is like, I was voting for Katya or something. Like that scares people who are used to a certain thing being a certain way, who are used to sort of June Cleaver and have this nostalgia lens looking back on Leave It to Beaver and don't want something like they thought Good Times was revolutionary. They can't even imagine something like Will and Grace being on TV. And then RuPaul's Drag Race is just, they've blown their top, right? I think those folks are very loud, but I think there are more people who are just craving diversity and craving different stories. We're in a place right now where we have quote unquote superhero fatigue. We're tired of seeing superheroes in movies, right? In media. We're tired of seeing, and when I say we, I mean the consumer. There are certain tropes that are becoming passé now because a lot of folks have done the work to make what was once revolutionary show up everywhere. So I think we're at a point right now where that the fight is going to continue to have accurate representation, but the media machine is so hungry for different voices, different types of voices, and things that will get people engaged with the media to a point that they're willing to fork over their dollars to see more of it, that they're willing to listen and willing to engage with a bunch of different things right now. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect place for us to take a break. So,
cool.
Stay tuned for our second half here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Jordan Green, artist and designer. So stay tuned, and we'll be back shortly, folks.
Enjoying our shows and can't get enough of us? Follow us on Instagram at Voice America Talk Radio and see what we're cooking up for you.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Live up to your full potential. You've heard that for years, but now there's a channel to help you get there. Introducing the Voice America Empowerment Channel. Get motivated, hear about success stories, and positive encouragement. The Voice America Empowerment Channel is the home of the world's top life coaches, entrepreneurs, and success experts. Listen to the Voice America Empowerment Channel. It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed.
This is the home of the top life coaches, entrepreneurs, and success drivers. The Voice America Empowerment Channel.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Barry Clark, licensed marriage family therapist, here with Jordan Green, designer and artist. So, if you from our first half, we were talking about Jordan's work with the We Belong and the particular storyline that they had done. And we were just talking in the end of the last section, talking about some of the hero fatigue that has happened. I totally agree with you about the fatigue. And I'd also say, I mean, we saw sort of this same fatigue in some levels, even with the classic cowboy westerns. I mean, you can say there's a fatigue even with the, say, spy dramas. Which becomes up with an aspect of something that I know I recently had heard talk after the Spider-Verse came out with a designer, which was talking about that the character of Spider-Man and the like can only advance so far in their life cycle before they stop being something that is identifiable to that target audience.
Yeah.
Which point that with the fatigue we're hitting here is also about storylines that and ideas that are having some trouble maintaining that, shall we say, disbelief or that ability to stay in a certain state-specific period.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who your target audience is, right? I think that it gets back to that. There are certain stories, certain specifics of stories that will not relate to people anymore, right? So you talked about the Western. There was the reason why the Western appealed to people is this. One of the reasons was it was exploratory and nostalgic. Like looking back on it, it was about adventure, retelling and mythologicalizing the expansion of the American project,
right?
The United States project. And so it came at a time where it was really important for people to have a sense of America was right. And, people, it was the sort of lone gunman, shonen warrior thing.
Right.
I think something like spy movies were happening during the wars, the Great Wars. Spy movies, spy stories, James Bond stories actually led to a lot of different war tactics in Jakarta. And like if you read the Jakarta Method, you learn that people who started the CIA used to pass around the James Bond book to sort of give themselves this idea of this fictionalized world where spies were doing things on the side of the good nations of the world. And so spy movies, you have to think about like James Bond is happening in the 1960s and the 70s. We're also fighting the Korean War. We're fighting the Vietnam War. And so I think it gave us a place to escape, but also tie us back to a reality in which and propaganda that we needed to have to get through our daily lives. And I think those trends fall out of favor, one, because the market becomes saturated with this. We saw this happen with blaxploitation too, right? So is it Mario? One of the Van Peebles. It's either Mario or Melvin. I always get them confused. But Melvin Van Peebles, right? He did Sweetbacks, and I always mess up this name, but that kicked off the whole wave of blaxploitation films. Like Shaft is a is a pale imitation and then a reinterpretation of Sweet Sweetbacks.
Mhm.
And you look at Sweet Sweetbacks, and it was this revolutionary film that showed a black man really sticking it to whiteness, the control apparatus of whiteness,
Mhm.
and being bad about it. And you saw Quentin Tarantino approach it again in Django Unchained, but that's a callback to Sweet Sweetbacks, right?
Yeah.
And Melvin Van Peebles really did it. And I'm sorry if it's Mario Van Peebles, but the Van Peebles director
Right.
really, huh?
I said right. Yeah.
The Van Peebles director really did that because he wanted a revolutionary film. He wanted to see himself represented, and he wanted to see that. And then Hollywood took that and was like, "Oh, people are craving this," and they just like mass produce a bunch of really bad stuff.
Mhm.
All really great now, looking back
Right.
on it. But yeah, I think that's what Hollywood does. That's what a corporate machine does. Entertainment in particular, they take things that are popular or revolutionary and they re-feed back our culture to us. And so I think about, and we really owe a lot of respect to, I don't think this gets praised enough. Friggin' Steven Universe made it possible for all of these other queer coded characters to be openly in a relationship with another character in children's media, because they proved that it would be popular enough and acceptable enough and profitable enough to work, right? And so Steven Universe, like I watched Steven Universe after I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, and as they were coming out,
Right.
Avatar: The Last Airbender had a perfect opportunity to have queer coded characters, but they couldn't because studios would not allow that to fly in a children's TV show.
Right.
And Steven Universe allowed that to happen. And from then Korra comes out, and Korra hasn't, the main protagonist of the show is in a relationship with a woman. So it's just like
by the end of the series,
right? Yeah, they still had to the cartoons still have a little bit of a ways to go, but they found out there was a viable market audience for it. And so corporations, people who control corporate narratives, big narratives, are allowing for those things to happen now. They don't feel as scared now. So,
well, I don't know. I'm wondering if also that's an aspect of pre-pandemic or during pandemic versus what we're seeing now post-pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true too. I think you're right in terms, especially when it comes to superhero fatigue. People consumed a lot of media during quarantine. And I say quarantine instead of pandemic because for me, I feel like we're still in a pandemic.
Which many we are, but we're not having to have that same quarantine.
Yeah.
We're having a different level of need for escapism.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of escapism people want is different, right? You notice that a lot of our media doesn't even talk about quarantine or the pandemic because we just want to get back to normal. So I think that this desire to get back to normal is also impacting our superhero fatigue. We don't want somebody to save us because for a lot of people, no one did come to save us. We're still in a grieving state in our society about, and I would say we're now past the grieving to the anger. Like I'm seeing a lot of media, a lot of things be around the anger of what we went through collectively, and not have it not be addressed and not be just have it not be addressed collectively. So,
and that's part of the grief cycle is an area. I mean, there's the denial, there's the anger, there's the bargaining, there's the depression, and then there's the acceptance.
Right.
It's also very dangerous for people to get stuck in things such as obviously the depression, but also very much getting stuck in the anger.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's difficult. To not be stuck in the anger part of the grief that we're in right now, collectively, because for me at least, where I was, was I saw a wonderful opportunity to change the way our society functioned, to really come together and take care of ourselves, to really change the way that we operated. And instead, what we've had is the return to office mandates and moratoriums lifted on rent. And we've had a lot of venues go back to not providing accessibility for folks. And so for people, for the first time in a while, we were equalized, I think, in society in a way that we saw that the world could be different. And now that's why there's such a strong push in media and everything to get us back to quote unquote normal, get us back to this hierarchy, get us back to this way in which we disregard each other. And there's a cranking up of the capitalistic impulse, right? Because it distracts us long enough to not question, hey, why is it that I have to commute into work? Why is it that I have to work at all? Does my job really matter? Why is it that I can't get access to healthcare? Why is it that people can't get what they need? Those are very scary questions for people who are hoarding wealth right now. So I wonder oftentimes what we could do in our media to make us really think about, one, to create worlds that those things are possible, but two, how can we give little bits of joy to sustain ourselves back to doing things that stubbornly push us toward a world in which we take care of each other.
Well, one of the things that is also making, and I'm going to say this as a personal standpoint, is like everything that's happened with our sort of supply chains is also making it a lot harder for that push to go back to this normalization that they desire. But hey, it's stumbling over a bunch of stuff.
I mean, isn't it funny? Yes, I agree. Isn't it funny that there was this whole shop local, source local movement like 10 years ago that was all about trying to locally source your stuff and stopping our impact on interrupting the global chain. And we didn't really support it. And then we had quarantine. Well, I supported it, and I think some other people supported it, but Amazon is too goddamn convenient sometimes, right? Why walk down to Ace Hardware or why walk down to your local hardware store when you can just, order some duct tape on Amazon and have it at your house within the same day?
Assuming that's capable of being done. I have yet to get that same day Amazon anything.
Oh, well, that is because Amazon can't do it anymore. Like pre-quarantine, they were able to. Post-quarantine, it's been very, very difficult. I haven't seen a same day thing come from Amazon in such a long time as well. So yeah, I think that I think that the quarantine that happened in the United States showed people that we could live differently. And I think it's just too inconvenient for a lot of people to change that.
Well, it's also not getting lost in that nostalgia.
Yeah.
And that comes up with what we're seeing in the fatigue. Because, I mean, frankly, and I forget who I was talking to, is like, really, the entire DC and MCU universe, the amount of mental fatigue that should exist in that world, let alone level of anxiety with the amount of events that happen there. No one should be basically sane, or there be even the amount of antidepressants needed in that universe would just destroy itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, they tried to actually address that in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier because they have the blip that happened. But they've just moved past it in all of the media.
Yeah.
They tried to address the blip in the way that the blip impacted our understanding, that understanding of the world. And you see remnants of it in the story with Monica Rambeau
Mm-hmm.
with her mom. You
Mm-hmm.
see remnants of it in other parts of the in other parts of Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
But they they really haven't. I really appreciated the Falcon and the Winter Soldier because of all of the propaganda, like military propaganda that was in that. And I love a good military cop propaganda show. I love Law and Order SVU. I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I know it's propaganda, and I know I'm not immune to propaganda, but I also love a good, predictable procedural. Uh, of all of that stuff, like the only place that addressed of all of the Marvel media, the only place that addressed the quarantine
Mm-hmm.
was Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and you don't see it anywhere else in the media
Right.
right now.
Right. Yeah, I know that some people I was talking to over at in sort of the tabletop role playing is like, oh, they weren't exactly keen on an idea for a scenario that involved disease and quarantine just because it was so close to
Yeah,
pandemic. And it's like, okay, gonna have to keep
but
these ideas tabled for a little while longer.
yeah, but excuse me, as my sister has challenged me to do,
Hmm.
Rafi, if you end up listening to this, thank you for this. You got to lean into being uncomfortable. You got to lean into the bitterness. You got to eat that bitterness for a little bit. Because speaking of is one of the only ways to grow, you
Hmm.
know? And I get that, I get the avoidance or the denial, because boy, howdy, do I get that. But if you don't face it, if you don't talk about it, if you don't acknowledge it, it festers
Hmm.
and it changes and morphs, and it it ends up being in you anyway, right? It's there. So collectively as a society, I really want us to sort of acknowledge we lost so many people during quarantine. I lost both my dad and my grandmother, and it wasn't due to directly due to COVID, but it was due to the quarantine. Like I wasn't able to get to my dad in the hospital. And as listeners know, like Black people in hospital settings are not treated well. Black bodies are not treated well in the same way that white bodies are. And in the same way that other lighter skinned bodies are. Like basically the darker your skin, get luck in a racist medical setting. And
And then
so it's
throw in
real,
size as well.
huh?
And then throw in size as well.
In size as well, right? And my dad, I was at the hospital every day with my dad because I knew those things, and I knew he needed someone to be a guardian. And then I wasn't allowed to go to the hospital because he went into the hospital February for something totally unrelated to COVID. He went into the hospital in February of 2020. And as you know, by March of 2020, we were all in quarantine.
Hmm.
And I remember the day that they told me that I couldn't come back to the hospital. And it was a really hard time. And when he passed in May of 2020. When he passed, it wrecked me. I was on the phone every day with doctors um, and medical
Hmm.
specialists and practitioners. And I basically, was fighting so hard, but you can only do so much through distance. You can't be there, you can't see them, but you can't touch them. And after he passed, I thought about just disconnecting. And a lot of people, including my therapist, um, including a lot of meditation groups I was in, some medication, who fought to keep me back. My ONYX brothers fought to keep me here because and I mean mentally, but also physically. Like I just wanted to check out. Like I just couldn't deal with, like, I study public health. as an undergrad is what my major was my degree is in. And so I knew the score and I knew how things could have been different. And and to have a national infectious disease pandemic happening in the background of my dad dying was a little bit too much. And so yeah, I think that a lot of us want to just like not think about that time at all. But if I don't think about that time, I lose the memory of my dad. And if I don't sort of look at the bitterness, I don't get to see how hard we fought for each other. I don't get to see the beauty that my ONYX brothers were able to show up and provide me, you included. I don't get to see what family and community looks like, truly. Sorry, my alarm just went off. Sure. What family and community looks like, truly, because all of that came through during that hard time, and it's a bitter time, but I also know now what it feels like to be supported. I now know what it like. There are certain things that I'm very clear and strong in, and I don't get that unless I face the bitterness of my dad's death. And so I want to encourage us to face bitterness in our media, in our narratives, in our storytelling, and stop trying to gloss past those hard parts, because if we don't, we can't really heal those hard parts.
Mm-hmm. And I give you props for all of that. I give props to your therapist. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the therapist speaking too. Yeah.
Yeah. If I could, I don't know if it's uncouth, but Carrie Powers is my therapist up here. She is amazing. And you have an opportunity to ever work. I highly encourage people who are racialized or marginalized in our society to work with people who share those same marginalizations. And Carrie was the third Black therapist, but the first queer Black therapist that I know of, that I worked with. And it was incredible. So I highly, highly recommend that.
Very good. So I'm wondering, how did they help you with doing public speaking for WonderCon?
They didn't. I mean, I not that they didn't. I'm sure that they I'm sure the work that we did fed into it in some way, but WonderCon, I have a background. I am a man of many skills. I have a background in public speaking because I was a theater major in high school. So I went to an arts high school for theater. So I'm very fortunate that it's kind of hard coded in now to do public speaking stuff. Like there's a lot of tricks from theater that translate really well over to public speaking. So yeah, I'm just very fortunate. But WonderCon was a blast. I know you wanted to ask me about it anyway, so I'll just...
Oh yeah, because a chance to be also talking about your work in a venue like that and be asked to. It's, again, not something that every artist gets to do.
Yeah, I was very... Goodness. Victor and William have done an incredible job of putting us on, and they are... And all the other folks at Stackdeck Press, they're amazing. Tara, forgive me for mispronouncing it. They're rock stars. And to be sort of rolling with these queer comic book publishers, indie comic book publishers, they kind of just put the opportunity out there, and I took it. I was just like, I haven't been to I grew up going to WonderCon. I haven't been to WonderCon in forever, since they moved it from San Francisco to LA. So I went down there and I had me a grand old time. I stayed at the hotel that was right next to WonderCon. I went into the convention center, and speaking on that panel was amazing. Being with those Black artists was amazing. I've really loved William's work for a long time. William is so brilliant, and he does a lot of horror stuff, which is I don't really engage with horror. My anxiety don't work that way, but I love a good horror comic. And so yeah, God, that was so fun. It's the thing that made me want to start doing more comic work, because I was like, if I could do this, just like draw comics and then travel around and like be paid, I would do it forever if I could,
Right.
you know.
Right. Well, and hopefully we'll be having another interview for one of your next pieces of work out here soon.
Yeah, hopefully you putting the pressure on. We'll see.
I try
We'll
to do
see.
that with the loving skills of a therapist.
Right, right, right. But all the roughness of an Onyx brother, right?
Well, I have to wear many hats.
Right. So yeah, I mean,
Have my statty hat, so it's like,
that's right. That's right. So yeah, I mean, I'm working on it. We just moved too, so it's like we just moved to a house out of an apartment, me and my partner. So I'm finally settled. That was another reason we had to push this conversation off, because I moved and couldn't find my mic or couldn't find any of my setup really. So I'm finally settled in. We're settling in here. So we'll see what comes out of this settling process. Yeah.
well, normally I ask the question about myth and realities around mental health, but I think we already covered it a little earlier on. So
Yeah.
I think we're
I
good
mean,
there.
okay. I will say, as sort of a parting word there, that um I think that people think that starting therapy can be the cure-all. Like you start therapy, you work on your issues. I had this problem too. And what you realize quickly is that you starting therapy is just the start of your healing journey. And you really want to be in the flow of healing. And trying to get into the flow of healing in our society is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
It's very, 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 very difficult. And maintaining that flow is very, very, very difficult. So, and that that therapy isn't the only way to practice mental health, right? And that I think that our ancestors, particularly Black people's ancestors, didn't have access to therapy, didn't have access to mental health in the way that we know it now, but found a lot of power through prayer and spiritual practices, and developed a deep understanding of themselves and how they related to each other through spirituality and religion. I was not raised religious at all. I want to be clear about that. And I still kind of side-eye it. But there's something to be said for the way our Black people found healing through church. I'm not a church person, but or temple or whatever you want to call it, right? There's a way in which we did that. And so I don't want us to because there's a lot of, I don't want us to just disregard the teachings and practices of the ancestors that got us to the place where we could be free, so we can be free to say no to those things. And that's something that I'm working on myself, is that I think that there are many different approaches to mental health and mental well-being and social well-being that white aligned and white accredited institutions have disregarded. And I know that you, Perry, have done the work to integrate some of those practices into your practice. I know that there are a lot of Black clinicians and practitioners of mental health therapy that recognize the ways in which it's still not complete. And there will get to a certain point in your healing journey where there are going, and this is where I'm at right now in these challenges. There are going to be ways, there are going to be spiritual technologies, there are going to be mental health technologies that are not Western coded, that are not Western acceptable yet, right? And they provide value for people. So if you find value there, do that. But also that doesn't excuse you from doing the work of going to see a therapist. Like, I don't know. There needs to be a balance there. So that's what I'll leave people with. around mental health. Take care of it because you want to be around for all your friends and family for a long time, I think.
And that doesn't also mean a state specific that's caught in nostalgia.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that nostalgia is one thing. And also we tend to look back on past practices with this rosy colored lens that I don't necessarily agree with. But, we do find that like how do I put this? We know that there's only so far that dialogue, talking therapy can go. And that sometimes the somatic needs to be engendered or sorry, like really like invigorated, released
Experience.
and experienced. Yeah. And so we also know that sound therapy, sound baths are really helpful for healing, like as a healing practice. So can you tell me why dancing to choir music in church is not seen as a valid practice as well as, or to some people, as like, I don't know, something that's more clinical? Like our people, like Black people, have known what heals us for a long time. And oftentimes and I don't mean to get all hotopy about it, but oftentimes we like there is a phenomenon in the Black American community in particular to disregard our medicines because white man's ice is colder. This is like a documented phenomenon. And so and it's not a phenomenon in terms of like nobody knows why it happens. It's a phenomenon because it is something that keeps happening to us. Our ancestors knew how to get us to this point, and we are very lucky to have access to psychotherapeutic models, pharmacological models, and understandings to help us navigate this ever increasing anxiety-ridden world. But also, there are healing spaces that Black people have created that are sacred to us that we can still access. And let's use them. Let's use them in ways that are positive and not discriminatory and not harmful to us to heal ourselves.
And that don't fall into a trope that can be mass marketed to.
Yeah, exactly. But, it was Black religious leaders that that allowed us to align our spiritual and social beliefs and practices to our institutional practices and force our institutions to treat us with dignity and respect. Those were Black religious leaders. And then in the South, and then in the Black Panther Party also had spiritual practices that they believed. A lot of Black revolutionary movements include a mental health component to it. And whether you call that mental health in the secular world, or you call that a spiritual belief in a spiritual world, it's up to you, but they exist. And no movement for liberation or change has ever been successful without some kind of spiritual component to it. Whatever that looks like, or if not spiritual, a mental health practice, I should say. People get a little weird when I say spiritual stuff, and I'm not trying to be all spiritual and hippie and woo woo. I want to be clear, but like social revolutions, moments, transformation requires that integration of the spiritual self, whether you call that mental health or something different. Yeah.
All of the above. So I think that's a great place for us to call it for today. Where can people
great.
and find more of your work with We Belong if you want to follow up?
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Perry. This was great. I'm glad you harangued me to getting here finally.
Yeah, well, timing. There's a lot to do with healing a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you. I'm gonna actually drop and go, and then
But if more people want to find more about We Belong in your work, where can they find you?
Oh yeah. So if you want to find me, thank you for helping me self promote. If you want to find me, my art account is J as in Jordan, K as in Kalamazoo, G as in green, A as in Apple, R as in Roger, T as in Tom, Z as in Zeta, JKG Arts on Instagram. And I am online everywhere as Jordanot. So that's JORDONAUT, like not like astronaut. Everywhere you can find me there. But yeah, I'm there. I'm slightly Twitter famous. Apparently, I've just gotten slightly Instagram famous, but I'm around. So come by, say hello. I'm always pretty friendly. So yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thanks again, and I hope everyone has had a good Pride and is having a good
Yeah,
summer.
happy Pride.
And we'll be back for more.
Okay.
Stay tuned, folks.
All right. I'll see you later. Good night. Bye.
See you later.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.